Here we go.
Live pricing for profit. Awesome. Good
I
to have
see
you
it.
here. Good to have you, Mr. Francis. How are we?
Not too good. Not too bad. Sorry, I should say. Very good.
Time for another
Yeah.
coffee.
Yeah, exactly. Need another coffee. How's it been, man?
Yeah, good. Thanks. Good. Just
Awesome.
beavering away, building that dam. So
Exactly. Well, I roped you in today to I want to run you through something. We were obviously just talking about it before. Wanted to share it with the community and everyone, because it's something that we cover a lot with our members. Run them through these kind of numbers. That's pricing for profit, and it kind of came up in conversation because obviously just spoke with a guy out of California. Runs the business with his wife. He's been running it for about 10 years. Sort of typical story. He started off doing the small stuff and has steadily grown to some larger jobs, built a pretty good name for himself in the local community, and has a good word of mouth, but wasn't really feeling like he's getting the financial return. And when we ran through his numbers with him, it was pretty obvious why. And some of it might seem straightforward, but I want to run you through sort of, in more detail so we can share this with everyone, what that actually looks like.
awesome. Let's bring it up. Let's check it out.
Wicked. So this is our price for profit sheet, which we obviously run everyone through, our members, and figure out some of the sort of 10,000 foot view of your numbers. Fundamentally, there's one main input, which is the fixed cost to run the business, and one main output, which is your net profit, right? That's the machine that we're trying to build. And to understand this, obviously you need to understand your profit and loss. And what a sort of typical profit and loss for a building company looks like is your revenue or turnover at the top. Out of that comes your cost of sale. That leaves you with your gross profit. And we want to be hitting a 20% gross profit there. Now, out of that gross profit comes your expenses and fixed costs. Now, importantly, this is something that a lot of people miss, is that your salary is a fixed cost to the business. And the reason that we want to hit that 20% is that in gross profit is that we know that your fixed costs typically sit around 8 to 12. That's a pretty standard amount and figure for a building company. That obviously leaves you with your net profit, which is your reward for all the blood, sweat, and tears that you obviously put into the business. So taking those numbers and where they kind of sit, guy that I was speaking with, he was generating somewhere around $100,000 as a net profit each year, but that was blended in with his salary. So in total, he was generating around $200,000 worth of gross profit. Now, his gross margin, he was going in at 15%, so he was pricing at about 15%. And where he was actually coming out, he wasn't 100% sure because he wasn't sort of back costing, but he sort of thought it was somewhere around 12 to 13%. So somewhere around that 12% figure, which is why his turnover was just shy of 2 million. Average job size is around 150, so he was doing about 10 to 13 jobs a year, and his conversion rate was around 30%, so 1 out of 3, which was meaning that he was needing to quote about 37 a year, which is a fair amount of time spent with the pencil and pad putting those quotes together. So we looked at some of his numbers, and there were some really big learnings for him in that process. Firstly, if we were just keeping most of the costs the same to run the business, but he wanted to still generate that $100,000 out of his business. Let's say he wanted to improve that slightly as well. Let's say he wanted to hit 150,000. If we just look at that one figure, right, which is that gross profit margin in his business, if he improves that to 15, right, he only needs to do 1.6. If he hits that to 20, he only needs to do 1.2. So you can start to see how when he changes that gross profit margin in his business, he can still get the exact same result, but ultimately the amount of work that he actually has to do to get there starts to change. There's a lot of ways to move that gross profit margin figure, whether it's the front end margin like marketing, sales, pricing, or positioning, and then obviously the back end controls. And that was one of the areas that he was having some difficulty with, some labor overruns and his change order variations process as well. What that also meant was that he was getting a similar result by moving that margin. He was still getting the same result, but ultimately he was having to do less jobs a year. So, instead of doing 11 jobs, he's doing 8, which means, that's 2 less clients to deal with. That's less paperwork, less admin. So, really when we're looking at that gross profit margin, it's how do we maximize working smarter in the business rather than working harder. And one of the other, key things that you can look at as well in terms of his numbers and where they were was his conversion rate. Because at a 30% conversion rate, that means, 1 out of 3, means he's sending a lot of quotes out, not getting a lot of work. Just looking at better qualification, positioning yourself through that sales process to really target a niche and a specific type of client is important too. If he was to just bump that by 50%, 16 quotes or 16 leads that he needs to deal with a year, well, that's, almost half the amount of time spent pricing for, again, the same sort of outcome or result that he's trying to target in the business. So there's lots of, obviously, under those 3 main levers of gross target margin, average sales value, and conversion rate, there's a lot of different ways that we can push and pull them. But it's really important to look at, what the impact of that is on the business and how much work you have to do to get there as well.
Awesome. Totally makes sense. So the other one as well is I was speaking to a guy the other day, and he was actually doing working 80, 100-hour weeks, working like a man possessed. And he was making okay money, but at the end of the day, just hadn't seen his family in about 12 months in a good chunk of time, hadn't taken a holiday. And one of the biggest levers we found for him was looking at that average dollar sale as well. So all things being equal, you can do yourself, a truckload of $10,000 projects, right? And this for a lot of the small guys who are just sort of getting into things, just bumping that by double means you have to do half the amount of projects, right? Same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes it's like, just cutting out some of the bottom and, targeting some larger contracts. So, the good thing to think about with average job sizes, it's not an exact science because it is a blend. It is an average blend, but definitely what we see a lot of builders do to be able to, attack that sort of time component you're talking about, because obviously more projects means more admin, means more paperwork, is just to really set like a minimum standard. And that's also really important to understand your numbers, right? Because you might find that to be profitable on a $40,000 or $50,000 job, you need to be hitting a 30 to 40% margin. And you might get price checked lots there. You might struggle to land those jobs. You're spending more time pricing. So, a lot of what we see a lot of our members do and what we help them to achieve is to set a minimum level, right? To go, hey, look, I really want to focus on jobs over $75,000, yeah, or over $100,000.
Yep, 100%. And just like one of our members, Mark, he actually just posted into the group there yesterday saying, so his average dollar sale is normally above the 500K mark. So he does sort of high-end renos and a couple of new builds and things. So he's between sort of 500K and 750. He's actually taken on a few smaller jobs recently with the material shortages. He's found it easy to do some smaller jobs, and he's actually just won 2 jobs in a row at a 50% margin. So obviously you've got to find a sweet spot. Doesn't mean that you have to, bump your average dollar sale up to $1 million, but you've got to work on all of those levers there to actually make some profit. And he's booked out sort of to mid next year, and for him everything that he wants is just profit. He understands when he first came to us that he was busy and he was making a small bit of money, and now it's like, well, hey, I'm not going to touch that unless I'm making good money. And these people are saying, yeah, sure, like that's the price, we want you to do it, so let's go ahead and do it. He's making good money, gives him the ability to pick and choose what he's doing, and what it's about at the end of the day.
Yeah, and you'd know, obviously, I think you worked with him pretty close on his marketing as well, and some of the, especially his digital side. That average sales value sometimes can be a challenge for, builders to understand sort of how do you get out of the markets you're in, right? Because you keep getting that word of mouth referrals. It's the same type of work. You feel a bit pigeonholed. And that's where it's really important to look at some different ways to generate leads from new ponds, 100%. Different areas that you typically haven't reached into to try and get a different type of work or a different job size as well.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, and same thing for him. You know, when we first started working together, he was needed a lot of leads to come through so that he could hit his targets. And just more recently, we've started putting more barriers in the way. So, for example, on his website, he's got a direct response website doing some online marketing, and he used to just have enter your name, email, and phone number, and let's book a chat. You know, but then the thing that was going wrong was that he was getting a truckload of leads come through that weren't qualified, didn't have the budget for it, had unrealistic expectations. So now we've added about 5 more variables into the inquiry form saying, what's your estimated budget? When you're looking to get started? You know, do you have finance in place? Do you have plans or permits? And ultimately we get a lot less people fill that out, but it means that the people that do fill it out are a lot more serious and going to turn into jobs a lot easier. Saves him from having to do like we've got on here, 37 leads down to sort of 16. You know, we're trying to cut down the amount of leads that we have to deal with by qualifying them a bit more, and then you know, work on that back end margin as well to obviously you know, deal with those people more specifically.
100%, yeah. Well, definitely, if anyone wants to get their hands on the spreadsheet, we've got it up on a lot of our free resources, but we'll get one of the team to shoot it out to you as well. So you can have a play around with your own numbers and see sort of, you know, what making a change in some of these areas what kind of impact it would have. And obviously, if you want to know a little bit more about, you know, how we can move that target margin, how we can target that average sales and conversion rate, you know, hit us up.
Yep, 100%. So if you want the spreadsheet and you're on the Facebook group, then chuck a pricing comment below and we'll get the team to send it over. If you're listening to this on the podcast or elsewhere, then feel free to send us an email, team@theprofessionalbuilder.com with the subject line pricing, and we'll shoot back the spreadsheet so that you can plug in your own numbers, have a bit of a look at what your...
Everyone loves a good spreadsheet.
Like. Absolutely. Love a good spreadsheet.
Loves a good spreadsheet.
Even lots of good colors on it too.
Yeah.
Awesome. Hey, thanks very much, Matt. Always a pleasure.
Awesome, dude. Have a good rest of your day.